Good afternoon, everybody, because it is just now passing the top of the day. Um, my name is Ryan Shearer. I have been the GIS coordinator for the city of Newark for about 2 years now. And as a part of that, we've been doing a big upgrade and migration to ArcGIS Enterprise and a whole lot of other stuff that I talked about yesterday, if you caught that talk. This talk is a little bit different, as you might have guessed just from the title screen here. So basically, over the course of this process, I have learned a lot of vocabulary, and I found this vocabulary really hard to figure out at times. So in the interest of trying to spare people at least some of the headaches and confusion that I went through, I'm going to talk about some of that today. So what the hell is an ArcGIS data store? Great question. We'll answer that and a few other things besides. So first off, though, I do want to qualify this a little bit. I'm going to talk specifically about ArcGIS Enterprise, and some of this will touch on ArcGIS Online, but it will mostly be an enterprise-focused presentation because that's what I've been focused on for the past couple of years. If people really like this format, I'll happily look at other topics. But there's a lot of new terms flying around, which might be new or less new for some people, but I've noticed basically in that Esri in particular, but they're far from the only ones that do this. They're very good at saying what you can do with their products, but not what they are or how they work. And part of that, I understand, is going to be proprietary. These are for-profit companies. But when you're trying to get people to work on your platform and develop for your platform and do cool things with your platform, it gets a little frustrating. With all of that said, I'm not always going to be I might be a little bit critical of Esri stuff like that today. So the opinions expressed here are my own. I have a lot of respect for people that work at Esri that make all the software that we use. And I have, great respect for the solution engineers and the people that help us understand all of this stuff. So some of this is based on stuff that they've told me. Other stuff is based on my own research and talking with people around the profession. So that out of the way, what is ArcGIS Enterprise? ArcGIS Enterprise is ArcGIS for enterprise. Basically ArcGIS is the term that Esri uses as their sort of trademark. ArcGIS means it's Esri. Cool. Enterprise is a business organization. Cool. So ArcGIS Enterprise, pretty basic. Where this starts to get confusing is when you get to everything else that comes with ArcGIS Enterprise. So we have Enterprise, but inside of Enterprise, there are 4 submodules. We'll talk about all of these in turn, but you have the web adapter, you have the data store, that is where we get the name of the presentation from, ArcGIS server, and portal for ArcGIS. So something that I had run into is that there was confusion from a lot of people, and myself included, of where did ArcGIS server go? Well, and the answer is that it's a part of Enterprise, but where did it go and how does that all work? And I'm going to try to answer some of that today. But first, probably the easiest one to talk about is ArcGIS Web Adapter. So that's where we're going to start. This is a bit of software that connects your enterprise deployment to the web. So it sort of talks to IIS or Apache if you run Linux. I'm going to be using Microsoft terminology today because that's what we run, and that's what I imagine a lot of you run. But there is a Linux version of this. Most of this stuff runs on Linux as well. But if you're going to try to deploy on Linux, I can't help you. So basically, it's just a routing layer. It allows one IIS to talk to all of your enterprise. So that can talk to more than one server, more than one portal. This is the sort of thing that, unless you know what you're doing with networking, your IT department or a consultant or somebody should set this up, because it's really gets kind of crazy. Unless you really know what you're doing there, I recommend not being the one to set that up. And now we get to the ArcGIS data stores. And this is what the next several slides are going to be about. So basically, have you ever asked yourself, where does all that ArcGIS portal content go? Where does all of this ArcGIS online content go? Well, the answer is that it goes to ArcGIS data store. So ArcGIS data store is where portal content that is not provisioned from a service gets stored. There are several different types of data store. There are really 5 main ones. And these are all managed by enterprise. And as far as I can tell, there is no real way to get direct access to the data store. I've had some issues with one of our data stores over the past couple months and been in with some high-level Esri support, and they never suggested connecting to the actual data store database. Presumably there's a Postgres database in there somewhere, but if Esri support doesn't want you getting in there, then I assume that it is very hard or impossible for the average user to get in. These are data stores. They store content. The issue is that there are lots of different data stores. They all have data store on the end of them. And some of the naming for these can get a little confusing. Most notably, the first one right off the bat is the relational data store, which is used to store hosted feature layers and other portal content like dashboards, survey 123 forms, experience builder stuff. This is the main one you're going to need for an enterprise deployment. But I got tripped up here for a while with the relational bit of this because I'm like, hang on a minute. I thought SDE was a relational database. So how is this relational? And where does SDE fit in? And we'll get to SDE, don't worry, and how all of that works. But that was confusing. I wish this was called something like a portal store. That would be helpful. Let's see, what slide are we on? Okay. But you can, I think the reason they call it relational is that you can do relationship classes with some of this stuff that is in here, hosted feature layers and the like, if you know how to set it up through ArcGIS Pro. It's not super intuitive. And I haven't seen any guides in any of my trawling through Esri documentation about it. It's something that I have discovered through my graduate studies. The other one on this slide is the tile cache data store. This is not used to store aerial cache that you would be familiar with. This is used to store cache data for 3D host scene layers. Again, anytime Esri says scene in something, it's 3D. So if 3D makes your head spin, you can generally pretty safely more or less ignore it. Yeah, again, this is like, can this be called a tile scene data store? Because tile cache to me means aerial cache from like an imagery. And there is a place to store all of that, but it's not called a tile cache data store. It's called something else. So again, I'm just, some of the naming confuses me. So if I have to go dig through a URL, 3 different levels of URLs to figure out what something is, it's a little senseless. All right, so there are 3 more types of data stores. These are used less often. So the next one is the spatiotemporal big data store. And this is one you'll hear about a lot because it is required for GeoEvent if you're going to run that. And it can store all kinds of other location data. It's designed to handle date-time data at a large scale. I've heard it's performance intensive. I have never actually used one because we don't run GeoEvent. We do not have the need to run GeoEvent. And I talked a little bit about that yesterday. And then you have a graph store, which is a newer one, because this is what runs or stores the data behind knowledge graphs. If you've read up on those, they are these really cool looking charts that as spatially asset enabled charts that Esri has started making possible to create. They showed some stuff off at the user conference last year. It was really cool about like trying to manage medical supply inventory during natural disasters, and it was really interesting. So really cool, but kind of, at least it looked kind of niche, but exciting stuff. Then an object store is used to cache queries for hosted feature layers. That term hosted feature layer is going to keep coming up today. Again, I don't run one of those. I'm not sure who does, but it's there. It's in the documentation, so I'm going to mention it. So where does that leave other stuff? SDEs and other such databases like them are considered user-managed data stores. And to find that, you have to find the link inside of the link that has all of this stuff in it. Basically, it seems that the difference is, just going by the naming convention here, is that you run and configure them, not enterprise. So I can access the actual raw tables of my SDE, my two SDEs. I can connect and manage domains and all of that directly. Enterprise probably can do some of that stuff, especially with Python scripting, but you don't. You have options, basically. And then some of the other things that fit in here are folders for 2D aerial cache. Yeah, so they call those just folder directories where you can store aerial caches, which is descriptive and great. And that would be fine if you didn't also have one called tile cache, which was very confusing to me when I was setting some of this stuff up. Cloud data storage and big data also fall on this type. So you're talking like big cluster stuff, big data clusters. I think S3, Amazon S3 falls in here, which is their simple storage service that we use as a transitional layer to get aerials and other large data sets up from our local network to AWS. I should have talked about that more yesterday. But they are registered as full-on data stores in ArcGIS Server. So this screenshot is what this view looks like in ArcGIS Server Manager. And we'll talk more about Server Manager in the next slide, but you can see it's still here. So you can see we have several different data stores. We have our main relational store. For some reason, Portal wants me to have 3 separate different registrations for the same database and 2 for this one. And then we have 2 separate folder connections for aerials. One is for TIFFs and cache, and the other one is our SIDs. So our historical data, we just serve as a raw, as a SID, uncached. It loads slowly, but it's not used a whole lot, so it works out. And then we have a tile cache store. I'm guessing that got created when we set up the server. We don't have anything in it, as far as I know. We don't do any 3D stuff. All of these can be validated, same as you probably remember. None of that has changed. So, yeah. So SDE is still here. It's just considered a user-managed data store, which means it technically falls under ArcGIS Data Store, but you won't hear Esri talk about it in the other main marketing materials. So that caused a lot of confusion on my end, because I'm wondering, like, hang on, wait a minute. Where's my version database that I can trust? Because hosted feature layers have some cool things they can do, and they have some things that, they can't do. We'll talk more about that later. So ArcGIS Server is still around, still alive and kicking, very much so. Your version of ArcGIS Server is the same as your version of Enterprise. It's just been folded in. It can be federated to Portal, and it can be extended more and more with cool, new and fun possibilities. So we have services here. These are served off of SDE. We publish these with ArcGIS Pro, and they go up to the cloud. So we have our view services, we have our edit services. Hosted is hosted feature layers in a Portal environment. They're sort of a pseudo web service. I'll talk more about that later when we get to hosted feature layers. And then we have an imagery folder, and then system and utilities are things that ArcGIS Server puts in. Utilities is like not your actual utility data. That is your print service and things like that. So I'm going to briefly mention all the various extensions and things that you can do with ArcGIS Enterprise and ArcGIS Server. Some of these are extensions to server itself, and some of these are things that run inside of Enterprise that you generally run as a separate machine, or they're just a separate piece of software and they're not tied into ArcGIS Server. So like Notebook Server and Monitor, we heard about Monitor yesterday. These are separate things, and we run Monitor at Newark, but we run it on a separate server, a separate instance. So that's not tied into that. But some of these are included with enterprise license agreements, depending on maybe what your level is too, might change. I know, for example, that we basically get image server. I think we get data interoperability. We get Monitor. We might get Notebook Server in our EA, and we're at like level 3. We're at whatever the 40 to 50,000 person ELA is. But like we would have to pay extra for Geo event, which is one of the reasons we don't run it. Just expensive. So ArcGIS Image Server and Geo event are actually licensed extensions for ArcGIS Server. It's not uncommon that people will run they have two GIS servers. One will be a regular ArcGIS server and one will be like an image server. And you might have a third that's a Geo event server. So that's not an uncommon way people architect it. That's something that Esri recommends. Workflow Manager, Data Reviewer are extensions for ArcGIS Server. Okay, yeah, some of these are different, some of these are not. Finally, let's talk about Portal. So Portal is all the fun stuff that you get of ArcGIS Online, but it runs on your servers in your on your servers under much more direct control. So it does pretty much everything ArcGIS Online does. You can tie it into Living Atlas, though it's a little bit more involved because that does go through ArcGIS Online. You can set up custom print services. You can create all the usual things: Experience Builder, Web App Builder, Hub, though they call it Sites in Enterprise and Portal instead of Hub, but it's effectively the same thing. But Survey 123, Workforce, Field Maps, Dashboards, they're all here. Again, if you look at and those of you that run Portal probably know this already, but like if you log into Portal, it looks exactly like ArcGIS Online with a couple of extra settings and things to control like server connections. And you can federate your portal to your server. So what is that? What does that do? Federating is a process to link your ArcGIS server and portal together. What that means is that when you publish a service to your ArcGIS server, it automatically also goes to your portal. So you don't have to mess around with doing it twice. That's very handy. You can configure all your sharing permissions and all that straight out of ArcGIS Pro. This screenshot kind of gives you an idea of how that looks. So we have a portal folder where it goes, and then we have the server and folder where it goes when we publish out of Pro. And this is one of our public services, so it's shared with everybody. We want people to be able to use that data. But this is what this looks like. And then it's automatically created. And it will create separate items for every protocol that you serve. So there's a separate item in Portal for, this one would have 4. We would have a REST map image. We'd have a REST feature service. We have a web map and a web feature service on the OGC side of things as well for CAD. So federation is required to implement single sign-on through SAML or whatever else. If you want to run spatial analysis and map viewer, if you want to host layers published from Portal, you need federation. These have to be directly network connected. You know, it's a bit of a process to do it, but it's advantageous because it links your portal and your server together, and they aren't entirely the same, but they talk to each other. So you kind of sort of vertically integrate that. How does that all look in real life? So we have our IIS and our web adapter up here. We have our ArcGIS server and our portal for ArcGIS. Most of our workflow goes from ArcGIS server to portal for ArcGIS. Our relational data store also passes through ArcGIS server. And then we have our two databases and our tile cache for aerial images, and they all kind of feed in here. So generally the workflow is that we publish something from a database, it goes to the server, which then federates it to the portal, and then makes it accessible through the IIS. If we're creating like a survey 123 form, we'll create that in the portal, it'll set up in the data store and go up that way. And then we can also access it from the server, but we don't usually use that workflow. So trying to explain enterprise in layman's terms here. Again, because technically, as we would call all of these a data store, but these two are databases. This is a folder, and this is a different database entirely. So it gets a little confusing if you listen to all the terminology. Let's see. The next thing I want to talk about is what the heck branch versioning is, because that's a word that's getting thrown around a lot more nowadays. This is basically a updated way to do versioning, editing. So this works off of a specially configured feature service. You have to have a lot of items checked off to do it. You have to register the data as branch version specifically. You have to have global IDs enabled. You have to have editor tracking enabled. If you're in a feature data set, then every other layer in the feature data set also has to have its branch versioning registered, which can get weird sometimes. This replaces direct database connections for edits, which means it performs much better than just editing off the database directly. And you get all the benefits of versioning. So you can reconcile and post, and you have the ability to restore back in time. And all of these run off of a dedicated server instance. So it does eat some RAM. Let's see what else is important there. Oh yeah, it's required for utility network, and it is not supported in ArcMap, full stop, end of story. If you want to use branch versioning, you've got to go, at least for that data, 100% pro. So, and last but not least, or close to last but not least, what the heck is a hosted feature layer? This is the, I think I heard, Rick France say a few years ago, this is the new Esri's new favorite data layer. So it is a vector data layer. It can do points, lines, and polygons. It's hosted in ArcGIS portal and stored in ArcGIS data store. So it supports all the usual functionality. You can do your queries and your pop-ups and your symbology. Generally speaking, that's probably going to work a little bit better for various items. They do not support versioning or backups, which is why we don't use them for most of our production data. You can set these up with a relationship, but only if you do it in ArcGIS Pro before you publish them to portal or online. So that's something that I've discovered through schooling. The other important thing to note with a hosted feature layer that I just discovered last night is that if it's served from a portal, it will not have an item ID the way an ArcGIS Online item does. And that has serious implications if you're looking at doing Python scripting with content from an enterprise portal, as it turns out. So, yeah. Let's see. It's been about 24 minutes. It's 12:26. Oh, shoot. All right. Almost lunchtime. Questions, comments, concerns. If you want to, you can reach me on LinkedIn. I check that pretty often.